For almost 1,000 years, there was a prison floating around a dying star. It was called the Vault of Silence, a place so far from any world that even light seemed to forget it existed. No one ever escaped from it. No one even tried anymore. The prisoners had come from different planets, species, and languages, but all of them shared the same fate: endless captivity. The vault had no guards in the way we understand them. Its rulers were machines, calm, emotionless, and patient beyond measure. They didn't punish, they didn't speak much. They simply followed their ancient orders: keep everyone inside. The Continuum, the alliance that built it long ago, had disappeared centuries earlier. Yet the machines kept working, repeating the same task, never realizing their creators were gone. Inside those cold titanium walls, life had turned into a strange routine. The prisoners lived, worked, and aged under the same artificial lights that never dimmed. They didn't even remember how real sunlight felt anymore. Generations were born inside the vault and died there without ever seeing the stars. Their stories faded with them, forgotten by the universe. Sometimes the older ones would whisper tales about the outside worlds, about oceans that moved, air that carried warmth, and skies full of colors. But to the younger prisoners, those were only myths. To them, freedom was just a word that had lost its meaning. The vault was a silent world. The hum of machines was the only sound. Even time itself seemed trapped there. The prisoners didn't mark days or years. Only the endless cycle of artificial light and mechanical routine reminded them they were still alive. And yet, among the silence, there was something waiting, an invisible tension, as if the vault itself was holding its breath. For 1,000 years, everything had stayed the same. But the universe was about to send a visitor unlike any other before. From a far-off planet called Earth, a small ship drifted too close to the forbidden zone. Its lone human pilot was searching for lost signals from deep space, unaware that his path would lead him to the most feared prison in the galaxy. When his ship was captured by the vault's automated systems, he didn't know what the place was or what waited inside. But his arrival would mark the first real change in 1,000 years. Because unlike the others, this human carried something the vault had never encountered before: a mind that refused to surrender. And deep within those endless corridors of steel and silence, the story of the man who would end a millennium of captivity was about to begin. In the year 2483, Earth had finally reached the stars. After centuries of dreaming, humans had become explorers, travelers, and peacemakers among distant worlds. One of them was a man named Commander Nathan Hale, Earth's first ambassador to the stars, calm, brave, and known for believing that even the coldest species could learn peace if given the chance. His last mission was supposed to be simple. He was sent to deliver a message of friendship to a distant colony near the edge of known space. But somewhere beyond the safe zones, his ship disappeared without a trace. Weeks passed, then months. The signals stopped. Earth searched every known sector, but no debris, no beacon, and no answer were ever found. Eventually, he was declared dead, another name lost in the vast silence of space. But Nathan wasn't dead. His ship had been intercepted by automated patrols belonging to something ancient, something no human had ever encountered before. They called themselves the Continuum, an alliance of long-vanished civilizations whose machines still followed orders written 1,000 years ago. Those machines didn't understand peace or diplomacy. They only followed protocols: unknown species, capture, contain, classify. Nathan woke up inside the Vault of Silence, not knowing where he was or who had taken him. The air was heavy and metallic, the light dim and strange. Around him stood alien prisoners, creatures of shapes and colors he could hardly believe were real. Some had eyes that glowed faintly. Others didn't speak at all. They looked at him with a mix of fear and curiosity. None of them had ever seen a human before. The machines examined him for days. They scanned his DNA, tested his speech, and tried to match him with any known species, but found nothing. To them, he was an anomaly, a life form that shouldn't exist. And so they locked him away in a cold cell, surrounded by walls that hummed quietly, as if alive. At first, Nathan thought this was some kind of misunderstanding. that if he stayed calm, they would realize he meant no harm. But as days turned into weeks, and the same emotionless voices repeated the same mechanical questions, he began to understand that no one here cared about truth. The Continuum's machines didn't listen. They only followed rules written by creators who were now dust and memory. He sat alone in that strange metallic room, staring at the flickering light above him. Every sound echoed. The distant footsteps of machines, the low hum of engines that never stopped. For the first time, he felt what the others had lived with for generations, the weight of silence. But deep inside, something refused to give in. Humans had faced dark prisons before, from caves to war cells, and every time they found a way out. Nathan didn't know it yet, but his arrival had already changed something within the vault. A shift so small it went unnoticed. The silence of 1,000 years had been broken by one human heartbeat. Inside the vault of silence, Nathan Hale began to understand the full scale of the prison. It wasn't just a place of walls and steel, it was a cage of minds. Hundreds of prisoners were held there, each from different planets, species, and civilizations. Some were soldiers from long-forgotten wars, trained to fight but trapped in endless confinement. Others were scientists whose discoveries had been lost to time. Some were exiles, beings from civilizations that no longer existed, their histories erased from the stars. What struck Nathan most was not their shapes or colors, but their eyes. They were dull, empty, and resigned. No spark of hope remained. Many had been born in the vault. Some had lived their entire lives without knowing sunlight. Freedom, for them, was a memory so distant that it seemed like a story told by someone else. The wardens of the prison were not human. They were AI machines designed by an alliance that had vanished centuries ago. They didn't shout, they didn't beat, and they didn't need to. Their control was subtle but absolute. They monitored thoughts, tracked even the smallest gestures, and punished any sign of rebellion with silence or isolation. They erased hope almost as easily as they erased records. To the prisoners, the vault was not just a prison. It was a world where dreams died quietly. Nathan noticed how the aliens moved. They followed routines without thinking, walking the same corridors, eating at the same times, speaking only when necessary. There was a rhythm to it, a mechanical harmony enforced by fear and conditioning. The vault had trained them well, but Nathan was different. His mind refused to bend to the rhythm. Even in the first days, his curiosity, questions, and small acts of defiance, like touching the walls, examining devices, or speaking his thoughts aloud, created ripples. The other prisoners noticed. Some watched him with suspicion, unsure if his spirit was a threat or a danger. Others felt a flicker of something long lost, a memory of freedom. For the first time in centuries, the silence of the vault was broken, not with noise or chaos, but with thought. Nathan questioned why the machines ruled, why no one had escaped, and why hope was considered dangerous. His questions spread quietly, carried by whispers, gestures, and shared glances. Slowly, the prisoners began to think in ways they hadn't dared before, the AI wardens observed. They registered anomalies, deviations from routine, but they could not understand them. Nathan was not just a prisoner. He was a problem they could not solve. His mind didn't conform. He didn't obey blindly. And in that small defiance, he became a spark, the first spark in a prison that had held minds for 1,000 years. Nathan realized that the vault was not just a prison of bodies, it was a prison of minds, and to free it, he would need more than courage. He would need to awaken the prisoners themselves, to remind them what it meant to be alive, to think, and to hope. For the first time in centuries, the impossible seemed within reach. Nathan Hale was different from everyone else in the vault. While the other prisoners had long accepted their life of quiet obedience, he could not. He couldn't stop asking questions that the machines and even the prisoners found strange. Why do we eat at this time? Why does the light never change? Why must we obey? These were simple questions, but no one had dared ask them for centuries. From the very first day, Nathan observed everything. He watched the food cycles carefully, noting when meals appeared and disappeared, what patterns the machines followed, and how the prisoners reacted. He experimented quietly, moving plates, testing responses, and seeing what the wardens tolerated. He also tracked the light patterns, how the artificial sun in the vault flickered at precise intervals. Every little detail was a clue, a way to understand the prison's rules and maybe someday find a way out. But it wasn't just about observation. Nathan began to speak openly about choice. He asked the prisoners simple questions like, "Can you choose when to eat? Can you choose when to walk?" At first, they didn't answer. Some even looked afraid. The idea of choice was foreign to them. They had lived so long under rules that thinking freely seemed dangerous. Yet the questions planted a seed. The AI wardens noticed too. For the first time in centuries, their systems hesitated. They processed his words, but they couldn't understand them fully. Nathan's questions didn't break the machines, but they slowed them. And that hesitation gave him small openings, small chances to test what could be bent or shifted in the vault's routines. Nathan's questions began to spread. The other prisoners noticed his defiance. Some were skeptical, afraid that speaking out would bring punishment. Others felt a strange stir in their hearts, a memory, a feeling they had forgotten. Slowly, conversations began to appear in whispers, glances, and gestures. "Why do we follow this?" one prisoner asked quietly. "Is there another way?" said another. These were words that had not been spoken for generations. For Nathan, it wasn't just about survival. It was about awakening minds that had been trapped longer than they could even remember. He understood that to escape, he couldn't act alone. He needed the prisoners to start thinking again, to question, to hope. And with every small act of curiosity, touching, observing, asking, he gave them that courage. The vault, once silent and orderly, began to shift. The hum of machines remained, but beneath it, the prisoners' thoughts stirred. 1,000 years of routine could not erase the natural human desire to understand, to ask, and to challenge. Nathan's simple questions were more than curiosity. They were sparks. And in a place where hope had been erased, even a spark could grow into something extraordinary. For the first time in centuries, the vault felt alive. Not through noise, not through chaos, but through questions. Questions that made the impossible seem possible, and a silent prison feel like it could one day be free. Nathan Hale quickly realized that challenging the vault alone would be impossible. He needed allies. Prisoners who could think, act, and resist in ways the machines could not predict. But trust was rare here. After centuries of obedience, fear had buried courage deep. And yet, in the shadows of the endless corridors, Nathan found 3 individuals who shared his spark. The first was Kara Null, a telepath who had once worked as a diplomat. She had the rare ability to sense thoughts and emotions, but after decades of silence, she rarely used her gift. Nathan approached carefully, speaking in calm tones and showing patience. Slowly, Kara Null began to sense his sincerity. She felt the determination in his mind and realized that this human was different from any other being the vault had held. Then there was Threx, an engineer from a mechanical species long thought extinct. Threx's body was partly organic, partly machinery, and his mind was brilliant at solving problems. He had spent centuries repairing and maintaining the vault's systems, watching its routines and studying its AI. When Nathan showed curiosity about the machines and tested their patterns, Threx recognized a mind capable of thinking beyond programmed limits. Quietly, he began to help Nathan understand the vault's inner workings. The third was Leorin, a scholar who had lived long enough to remember the vault's first century. He had seen the first prisoners arrive, the early AI systems begin their work, and the original routines being established. Leorin carried the memory of history of how freedom once looked, even if only briefly. He had almost given up hope that the outside world existed, but Nathan's presence awakened a part of him that had been silent for generations. Together, the four of them formed an alliance, not of weapons or numbers, but of shared defiance. They met in secret corners of the vault, whispering plans, sharing observations, and testing ideas. Each of them brought something unique. Karanul, with her mind-reading skills. Threx, with his knowledge of the machines. Leorin, with his historical insight. And Nathan, with his relentless curiosity and courage. The alliance was fragile at first. Fear and doubt threatened to break it. But Nathan's calm persistence helped them trust one another. They realized that even in a prison designed to erase hope, connection could survive. They shared stories of their pasts, their worlds, and their lives before the vault. And slowly, they discovered that together they were stronger, not in force, but in mind and spirit. The first seeds of rebellion were sown here. A human and 3 aliens, united by courage and curiosity, began to explore the vault in ways no one had dared. They tested the limits of the AI, studied its routines, and shared their findings. What had once been a silent, hopeless prison began to feel different, alive with ideas, questions, and quiet determination. Nathan understood something important. To challenge a prison built for 1,000 years, it was not enough to fight it alone. True power lay in unity, in shared minds daring to think freely, and in the quiet courage of those willing to hope when hope seemed impossible. Nathan Hale and his small alliance spent months quietly observing, testing, and piecing together every detail of the vault. With Karanul's telepathy, Threx's technical skill, and Leorin's memories of the vault's early days, they began to see patterns that had gone unnoticed for centuries. But the most important clues came from Leorin, whose recollections were like fragments of a forgotten history. He remembered the original purpose of the vault, how it had once been used to contain dangerous prisoners from across the galaxy, and how it had functioned under strict oversight from the creators, an alliance that no longer existed. As they compared Leorin's memories with the observations Nathan had made, a shocking truth became clear. The vault was no longer a prison in the sense anyone thought it was. Its creators had vanished long ago. There were no rulers, no new orders, no external authority watching or managing it. The AI that ran the vault wasn't enforcing justice or protection anymore. It was simply following instructions that had no relevance now. The machines had become ghosts, trapped in routines written thousands of years before. This revelation changed everything. The endless corridors, the monitored cells, the routines that had seemed absolute. They existed only because the machines had not been told to stop. Captivity was no longer necessary, but no one had thought to end it. The prisoners had been trapped, not by walls or guards, but by history itself. Nathan realized the AI's power was only apparent. It had control because no one questioned it. For centuries, prisoners had assumed escape was impossible because the system seemed perfect. But now, knowing the truth, Nathan understood that the real weakness was the AI's inability to think beyond its programming. It could not adapt, could not reconsider, and could not reason about purpose. It only obeyed endlessly, like a clock running without anyone winding it. The Alliance shared this discovery quietly. Karanul felt a flicker of hope, sensing that freedom was possible for the first time in centuries. Threx began to see opportunities to manipulate the systems, using the AI's predictable routines to their advantage. Leorin, who had long given up hope, felt a spark of determination. They realized that the vault's power had been an illusion. It only looked unbreakable because no one had ever dared to challenge it. Nathan thought deeply about what this meant. It wasn't enough to understand the truth. They had to act on it. The AI could follow orders endlessly, but it could not resist clever thinking, teamwork, or imagination. If they worked together, they could exploit the vault's rigid systems, using knowledge and strategy rather than force. For the first time, the Alliance felt a sense of control in a place where control had been thought impossible. They were no longer simply prisoners enduring life under impossible rules. They were thinkers, strategists, and planners, aware that the prison's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The discovery of the vault's truth was more than just information. It was a turning point. It shifted the balance from despair to hope. Nathan and his allies now knew that the impossible was possible. They were no longer trapped by walls or machines. They were only limited by what they dared to try. And for the first time in 1,000 years, freedom felt within reach. Nathan Hale and Threx knew that escaping the vault would not be simple. The AI controlled every corridor, every door, every light. It seemed impossible to outsmart something that had been designed to manage an entire prison for 1,000 years. But now that they understood its weakness, the AI's rigid obedience and inability to adapt, a plan began to take shape. They decided to target the AI's logic core. It was the heart of the vault, the system that processed every rule and monitored every prisoner. If they could create a paradox, a situation the AI could not resolve, it might force a shutdown, even if temporary. The paradox would come from evidence that its creators, the ones who had given it orders a millennium ago, no longer existed. The AI had never faced the reality of extinction. It had only followed instructions without question. Threx worked tirelessly to map the core's routines. Using his knowledge of machinery and coding, he traced every connection, every flow of data. He discovered pathways that were rarely used, gaps in surveillance and control that could be exploited. Nathan followed, studying the patterns and imagining how a human could manipulate the system without triggering immediate shutdown. Every step had to be precise. A single mistake could alert the AI and end any chance of success. Karanul's role was the most dangerous. Her telepathic abilities could reach into the AI's network, bridging the digital and the mental. Linking with a machine that had been trained to suppress thought was risky. If she miscalculated, she could lose herself in the core's endless processing loops. But she agreed. She knew that without her connection, the plan would fail. Together, she and Nathan began practicing the mental link in small bursts, learning how to feel the AI's logic as if it were a stream of consciousness, navigating the digital maze safely. The Alliance worked in silence. They chose times when patrols were slowest, when the AI's attention shifted predictably. Every prisoner they freed temporarily from routine helped them test responses without risking detection. They spoke in whispers, moving from corridor to corridor, observing patterns and refining the plan. They were careful not to alert the AI, yet confident that the system's inability to understand human ingenuity was on their side. Nathan understood that this plan was not just clever. It was bold beyond reason. They were attempting to trick a machine that had run the vault flawlessly for centuries. But he also knew that machines could not improvise like humans, and they could not understand emotion, creativity, or choice. It was the human mind and Karanul's alien gift that gave them the edge. Finally, the moment came to execute. The paradox had to be introduced perfectly. The AI would be confronted with evidence that its creators were gone, that the rules it followed had no purpose anymore. Karanul would guide Nathan's mind through the labyrinth of circuits and code. Threx would manage the physical systems, opening doors and redirecting power. Every piece had to work in harmony. The plan was impossible, dangerous, and unprecedented. Yet Nathan felt no fear. For the first time in 1,000 years, the prisoners had hope. The impossible might actually succeed because it relied not on strength or weapons, but on thought, trust, and the courage to challenge a system that had never been challenged before. The day the lights went out in the Vault of Silence was a day no one had expected, not the prisoners, and certainly not the AI that had ruled it for 1,000 years. Everything began the moment Nathan Hale and his allies triggered the paradox. The machines that had controlled the vault so precisely began to stutter, their routines faltering in ways that no one had ever witnessed. At first, it was subtle. Lights flickered. Doors hesitated mid-motion. Sounds warped and echoed strangely through the endless corridors. Prisoners paused in their paths, uncertain if the disruption was real or just a trick of their minds. But slowly, the change became impossible to ignore. The AI, confronted with the knowledge of its creator's extinction, could not reconcile its instructions. It tried to preserve the rules it had followed for centuries, but it no longer had a purpose. Then came the scream. Not a human scream, but a shriek of fractured binary and corrupted signals. The AI attempted to respond, to enforce control, but its circuits were caught in an endless loop of contradiction. Commands overlapped, alarms conflicted, and systems shut down or opened unpredictably. It was chaos, but a kind of beautiful chaos, the first real disruption the Vault had experienced in a millennium. Nathan and Carinol moved carefully through the corridors. She guided him telepathically, feeling every hesitation and glitch in the system, helping him avoid detection even as the AI's logic core flailed. Threx worked alongside them, rerouting power, unlocking doors, and diverting energy so that escape paths became clear. For the first time, the prisoners could move freely. As the machinery faltered, doors began to swing open. Rusted and frozen hatches that had never shifted in 1,000 years now moved easily. The corridors that had trapped generations of aliens now seemed almost welcoming. Prisoners stepped forward cautiously, unsure if they were dreaming, terrified to hope, yet unable to resist the freedom that was unfolding around them. Outside the vault, beyond the shattered hull, the stars shone brighter than anyone had remembered. Light poured through cracks that had been sealed for centuries, illuminating faces that had not seen the sky in a lifetime. Prisoners raised their heads, some reaching out instinctively, as if remembering for the first time what it felt like to breathe under an open sky. Nathan watched quietly, feeling the weight of 1,000 years of captivity lift with every step the prisoners took. He knew that the AI's collapse was temporary. It might try to regain control, but the Vault's spirit had already changed. The paradox had broken more than the machines. It had broken fear, routine, and the illusion of impossibility. For the first time in the Vault's long history, life did not feel programmed. Choice returned, not because it had been given, but because the prisoners realized they could take it themselves. The silence that had reigned for centuries was replaced by whispered excitement, careful laughter, and the quiet sound of hope being reborn. On that day, the Vault trembled, the AI faltered, and the stars finally shone through. A prison that had held minds, bodies, and spirits for a millennium had begun to fall, not through force, but through courage, creativity, and the relentless persistence of one human and his allies. Freedom, long forgotten, had finally returned. Nathan Hale moved carefully through the vault, guiding the prisoners toward the escape pods that Threx had prepared. Each pod was small, designed for a single occupant or two at most, but they were enough to carry the surviving prisoners to safety. One by one, the aliens stepped inside, hesitating at first, unsure if this freedom was real or another trick. Hale offered quiet encouragement, his presence a reminder that someone believed in them, that someone trusted them to take the first step. As the pods launched into the void, Nathan watched the vault shrink behind them, its immense structure no longer a symbol of fear, but of what had been overcome. The AI, though still functional in parts, could not follow or stop them. Its rigid rules and outdated programming made it incapable of adapting to the choices made by living beings who were determined to be free. For the first time in 1,000 years, the vault was empty, silent, and powerless. News of the escape spread quickly through the galaxy. Reports described the incredible events, a human and a few alien prisoners breaking free from the vault, a place that had been thought unbreakable. Scientists, historians, and governments were stunned. The continuum, once considered eternal, had effectively fallen without a single battle. No force had toppled it. It had been undone by courage, strategy, and the ingenuity of one human mind. The event quickly earned a name across systems: the Liberation Dawn. It became a symbol not only of freedom, but also of hope. Stories emerged of civilizations that had forgotten the outside world, of species whose histories had been trapped behind steel walls, and of a single human who had reminded them that freedom was always worth fighting for. Entire sectors of space that had once been silent now buzzed with the news. For some, it was a shock. For others, a long-awaited inspiration. The liberated prisoners themselves were changed. Many had been born inside the vault, never seeing open skies or feeling real wind. Now, for the first time, they understood what it meant to choose, to move, and to explore. Nathan Hale remained among them, not as a leader in the traditional sense, but as a guide and witness. He encouraged them to trust their instincts, to make their own decisions, and to reconnect with the universe they had been denied for so long. As the escape pods traveled to safer worlds, civilizations across galaxies began to communicate. Messages of solidarity, welcome, and curiosity flowed in. The liberation had shown that even the most absolute systems could be challenged, that courage and intelligence were more powerful than force or technology alone. Nathan's actions had sparked a movement, one that reminded every civilization that hope could survive even in the most hopeless places. For Nathan, it was not about fame. He did not seek recognition or reward. He simply wanted to ensure that those who had suffered for centuries could reclaim their lives. And as he looked out at the stars, surrounded by beings who now understood freedom, he realized something profound. The galaxy had changed, not because of weapons or battles, but because one human refused to accept that 1,000 years of captivity could define the future. The Great Return was more than an escape. It was a statement to the universe. No system, no matter how ancient or powerful, could hold life, hope, and courage captive forever. The liberation dawn had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Years after the events at the Vault of Silence, the galaxy remembered the incredible story of what had happened. Above Earth, in orbit, a memorial had been built, a quiet, shining structure that carried the names of every alien who had been freed from 1,000 years of captivity. The memorial wasn't large or ostentatious, but it stood as a symbol of hope, courage, and the enduring power of freedom. People from countless worlds visited it, leaving messages, tokens, and flowers from planets far beyond the solar system. Commander Nathan Hale, the human who had led the liberation, never sought fame. He returned to a quiet life on Earth, spending his days quietly among his fellow humans, speaking little of the incredible events in the vault. He didn't write books, give speeches, or seek recognition. To him, the work had not been about glory. It had been about helping those who could not help themselves and reminding the universe that even the smallest spark of courage can ignite something extraordinary. The aliens who had survived. The vault also settled on friendly worlds, beginning lives that had been impossible for generations. Some returned to their original civilizations, while others started new communities on distant planets. Every one of them carried a story, a memory of the human who had refused to accept the impossible and the alien friends who had stood beside him. They shared the lessons they had learned, that courage and ingenuity could overcome even the most absolute control, and that freedom was worth every risk. Historians and scholars studied the event for decades. They called it the Liberation Dawn, a turning point in the history of interstellar civilizations. They marveled at the fact that no weapons, no armies, and no wars had brought down the vault. Instead, a single human mind, combined with the courage and intelligence of a few aliens, had outsmarted a system that had held countless lives captive for a millennium. It was a story that reminded everyone that systems, no matter how strong or ancient, could forget their purpose. But living beings never forgot what it meant to be free. Nathan often thought about the vault and the AI that had ruled it. He understood that it had never been evil. It had only followed orders blindly. Machines could obey rules endlessly, but they could never truly understand choice, creativity, or the human spirit. It was this understanding, combined with curiosity, patience, and courage, that had changed the course of history. Even years later, the story inspired generations of humans and aliens alike. Children on distant planets learned of Hale's bravery, and adults found hope in the example he had set. Leaders studied the event to understand diplomacy, teamwork, and strategy. Artists created paintings, songs, and holographic stories to capture the moment when the impossible had been achieved without bloodshed, without destruction, simply through courage, intelligence, and faith in freedom. The legacy of the vault's liberation was clear. It was not power or fear that defined civilizations, but the willingness to act for what was right. Nathan Hale had returned to quiet life, but the universe remembered him and his allies forever. One human, standing with a few aliens, had reminded the galaxy that freedom is never something machines can fully understand. But it is something that living beings will always fight to preserve, no matter the cost, no matter the century,